We have been responsible for nearly 450 podcasts in the motivational, business, entrepreneurship, and personal development space in that period, with a cumulative reach of nearing 20 million a week.
Hi, and welcome back to the Weird World, everybody. We hope you are wonderfully well and thriving at the moment. We have another fabulous guest. So, Anna, come and introduce yourself and do yourself real justice.
Anna Parker-Naples. I do all sorts of things. I came into running an online business or making a profile for myself because I felt very much that I wanted 6 years ago for people to understand that they could completely change their life. And that's something that I very strongly felt that I had done. And over the last 6 years, I've had numerous businesses in that kind of online space. But the core of each of them, they've been very different things, but the core message of each of them is that you can do anything that you want. And there are two main ways that I work currently. One is with coaching and transformational work with all sorts of different modalities in there, predominantly NLP based. How we think, the words we use, the things we believe about ourselves can completely shift our reality. And I'm sure in this interview, I'll talk a little bit about what that meant for my personal life. And then the other side is I run one of the UK's leading independent podcast production and consultancies. And we have been responsible for nearly 450 podcasts in the motivational, business, entrepreneurship, and personal development space in that period, with a cumulative reach of nearing 20 million a week, which is amazing because all of those podcasts that we've influenced actually have this kind of change and transformational work at their heart. That's a little bit about me. And I really do believe that anything is possible. It's kind of my motto. We've just got to choose it, take the actions and lean into a bit of trust. So that's me.
Fantastic. So thank you. It's a beautiful world that you've created for yourself, and you have created this from scratch, really. So tell about the weird circumstances that led you from, whether it was the acting or the business that led you into podcasting.
It's quite a story, so I will try and condense it. But 12 years ago, actually nearly 13, when I was pregnant with my son, I had my third child. The plan had been pop out number 3 child and I will leap back onto stage. It was always theatre for me. It was always about the word, always about the word. And I always wanted to be on stage talking. And that was actually more important to me than the play. So I think that there were already signs that I was supposed to be doing something, either podcasting or being on stages myself, but as a speaker. And this complication happened. And I was told when I was about 10 weeks pregnant to anticipate I'd never walk again.
Gosh.
And we just got married, and third child, the kids were all under 4. I mean, it broke me, frankly. And I felt that my sense of identity, I'd always wanted to be on stage. I felt like everything had been stripped away. I'm generally a really positive and upbeat person. And then suddenly I felt like my future had gone.
Yeah.
And I was very low. And that's not a way I normally am. Quite understandable, but I knew I needed to do something about it. So I made a decision that as soon as the baby was born, I would find ways to come to terms with it so that I could still be my positive self, albeit with this life-limiting condition. And what I did was I went and saw a hypnotherapist who I didn't know was an NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic programming, because I didn't know anything about personal development I just didn't know about neuroscience. And he really got me to start thinking outside the box. One, what if I stopped talking about how bad I felt? Would I feel better? What would happen if I could actually be an actor who was a great mum and was at home all the time and got paid really well? And there was some truth behind my choices as an actor, is that I believed I could never earn money. And so there was some unraveling to do with what that was. And what if the doctors were wrong? And what if my body had the ability to heal?
Yes.
A very long story short, around the same time, we basically changed everything at home. We changed my language, the support system I had. I stopped talking about how bad I felt. And within within 3 months, I was using a Zimmer frame rather than being in a wheelchair. And within a year, I was then using crutches. And within probably a year and a half, I was walking. Like, people would have seen me walking, but I was still really limiting myself.
Yeah.
I would literally go and do what I needed to do to get the kids to school and preschool and not do a lot more.
Yeah.
But what I did gradually start doing was every night I would go for a 10-minute, very, very slow walk near my front door. So not far in case anything happened.
Yeah.
And I was at the time throwing myself into personal development, like I just discovered this thing that could make everything different. And I'd literally said before I left the house, so it's great. My husband was saying, it's great that you can do those little walks. And I was like, yeah, but I'll never run. And I was listening to this podcast on an iPod Touch, because back then podcasts were such a new thing. And I heard this amalgamated set of interviews from men, influential men, one of which was Richard Branson, who was talking about just go for whatever it is you want in life. And I've recently just been away with Richard Branson, masterminding with him on his personal island, which is great.
Look, I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah. and it was amazing to tell him this story as well. And then the other person on that I remember was Tony Robbins. And in my ears, he just was saying, whatever it is you keep telling yourself and other people you can't do, stop this cassette, because it had been taken from here, there and everywhere, and go and do it now. And I did. I ran to the next lamppost. Now, bearing in mind, I had believed I'd never walk again. I am walking, like, to the outside world, it looked like I was okay, but I wasn't. And it must have been like 15 steps at most, but I did it. And that for me proved that I could do anything. And it meant that what happened for me was I had the confidence then to realize actually I could be really successful as a voice actor from home, because I know I'm still going to have some physicality issues. I can earn great money. I can be there for the kids. And I threw myself into that whole world of audio from home. And 5 years later was then winning multiple awards in Hollywood for my audio work.
Wow.
Which is kind of an amazing, like, to go from, I've got these images of me in a wheelchair, and then 6 years to the day, I'm on the red carpet in Hollywood for the 7th time, which is crazy. Like, that's crazy. And it was dawning on me that there's something in my story, there's something in the massive shifts that I'd had that I want to tell everybody else. So it's at that point I started an online business about inspiring people. And bit by bit, the obvious thing was for me to podcast. And so many people wanted to know how to podcast. And I was there kind of at that boom, just as everyone was wanting to know. And that's why alongside my coaching, I then developed an agency and lots of trainings. And it's been kind of an incredible journey. It's been bonkers. The whole thing, my life is slightly bonkers.
It is an incredible journey, and I've sort of been out on the outskirts of watching that and listening to you at times and seeing people come on board and get involved with everything that you're doing. And it's been an absolute joy to witness other people flourishing under your hands, really. What did that feel like when you actually ran to the lamppost?
Exhilarating. Like, it was a real rush. I actually walked myself home. I was in pain. Like, I had a long way to go.
Yeah.
I came home like 11 o'clock in the morning, and that day, actually, I'd gone out early because it was a weekend. And I came in and I opened a bottle of champagne, and my husband was like, "What are you doing? Have you just got a new job or a new contract?" And I was like, No, this is bigger. This is bigger than. And I did have a little sip of champagne, because it felt like such a monumental moment.
Yeah.
And like I was saying, I think the fact that, and I guess there's an element of me that what Tony Robbins has done, not that I want to replicate him, because I don't have that energy and things, but the fact that he is reaching and transforming lives, I wanted to be able to do that for others. And then obviously when I met Richard Branson recently, and I've worked quite closely with him, it felt very much like the universe was supporting that journey.
Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of following that positive mindset of following that positive, literally, in your case, step. So for most of us, it should literally be those steps, because so many people out there think about what they want to do, but they don't follow it up with the action.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, especially, there are many conscious people out there who are very into spirituality, and they're doing a lot of the work on themselves, and then they're sat there waiting for things to happen.
Yeah, they're looking for the guidance. And actually, what I've come to understand even more so over the last 18 months is that the guidance isn't like an external thing. It's actually inside me. My radar is in me. People that aren't good for me, ideas that for whatever reason might look nutty.
Yes.
Even like offers or parts of the business that are working really well. If I feel heavy about them, I know they've got to go. And it's not always quick to unravel those things, when they're what pay the bills. But every time I ignore that gut instinct, which is actually, as I've thrown myself much more into my own spirituality and conscious connection, that's not just gut, it's not just a somatic thing. It is coming from somewhere else, a kind of higher part of me, which is the higher part of everything else. That I've learned to lean into that trust a lot more, almost like a surrender. I'm getting this message, somehow it's coming through my body. I don't know why, but I've got to share this thing or do this thing or train in this thing. And I feel very much like right now, I feel like I've come to the end of a cycle and we're beginning the next cycle of what is to come.
Well, I'm glad they feel like that, because I've started to listen to you a lot more since you've made that transition, actually.
Yeah, so I've had a very successful business podcast for 3.5, nearly 4 years. And then back in September, I just had this, I cannot talk about just this anymore. Cannot talk about it. I have to talk about the things that are going on in my life, my trust. And on paper, it didn't make sense to do any of that. But my God, the freedom, the connection, people who reach out to me now, and actually we have more listeners now than we had before we changed, which has been fascinating. And particularly as a podcast expert, we're actually not going after all the search engine optimization terms that we were before. I'm talking from the heart, and I'm talking about real life, my real life and my views on life, as I'm not as the expert, but as a what's the best way to describe this? As someone willing to walk and share that path of imperfection, so that others coming up behind me, it's easier for them to trust in themselves, I suppose.
Yeah.
I guess that's the difference in what I'm deciding.
And I think that's what's drawn me towards you sort of all the more as well, because we see, and I'm seeing it all the more outside on Facebook and social media, so many people pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and striving. Lovely. But when you've done the energy work, when you've done the NLP and the hypnosis and the Reiki and the MBIR that I do, and, everything else that we do, you realize that pushing is actually not probably giving you the balance that you need in the rest of your life, and something is going to give way.
Yeah.
And I know that my journey has been slower, but balanced.
Yeah.
Every single step of it is a balance somehow of me sort of shifting everything forward. And that's right for me. Yeah. And that feels great for me. But it's not what everyone else is doing.
No, and I think the interesting thing about that is that in my urgency to spread the word, and it's always that, like, there's an important message. People need to know they can change how they think or feel. In my urgency to do that, the ego massively kicked in, and ambition. I'm driven. I'm driven. My human person, my human side, very driven, very egotistical. I want the money. I want the outward success. I want all of those things. I achieved those things. I've won so many awards for business, for all sorts. I have written books that they sell massively. I speak on platforms I want to speak on. I'm connected with incredible people. And what I was seeing behind the scenes with people who have very impressive businesses in the online space is that they're really unhealthy, or they're really unhappy, or their lives are falling apart. And that's not what they share.
Mm.
And even like the launches that have gone well, if that's at the expense, these multi-million-pound launches, incredible achievement. But if it's at the expense of your health and you're constantly at hospital going for appointments, that for me isn't a good life.
Yeah.
And I feel like I saw behind the curtain on a lot of people in the personal development and business development space and realized I can't play that game.
No.
And
because of your health, for one, can you?
yeah,
Because you've got to be that little bit more careful. And, I suppose I came quite early to that realization, working in the world of TV behind the scenes. I wasn't one of those prominent, people in the, like I am supposed
what
now.
were you doing, Rachel? What was your role?
Oh, I started off at 19 as a junior secretary in the program planning department at Granada TV.
Oh,
We
right.
scheduled programs for TV, and then that department grew as Granada sort of
Was
amalgamated.
Granada in Manchester?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I had several job interviews when I was about 20 there.
Yeah.
I didn't get it.
Keith
Wasn't meant to
Green.
be.
It was just the most wonderful place to sort of grow up.
Yeah,
Because
I was looking. I had like the final round to be casting assistant for Corrie.
oh, brilliant! Yes.
We kind of hated that job because I just wanted to be in it anyway.
You want us to do all the roles.
Exactly.
So I started off there, and then I moved into production. I mean, it's that long ago. I was working on, like, You've Been Framed with Jeremy and Busman's Holiday and Cluedo, and so.
But I think what you said earlier is right, is that people who've come from creative backgrounds, I think we're more able to see possibility for our realities because that's what our skill set, that's what our honing ground has been. I don't know if you know the work of Rebecca Campbell, who wrote Light is the New Black. Do you know that?
Yeah.
So I can't remember if it's that one or one of her other audio books, because I always listen on audio. That is my zone of learning. There was a phrase that she said in one of her audiobooks that literally stopped me in my tracks, which was that the conscious leaders that are coming through, so many of us have had training in our early lives in media and new media, so that we can understand how to take the incredible technology that's been given to us over the last 50 years, and we can transmute that into having bigger reach. And I was like,
you are making me tingle. Literally.
Yeah, and I literally was like, that's why I'm running a podcast agency. Like, if you told me that's what I was going to do, I'd have said, you're nuts. I will never do that. But it's a vehicle and a mechanism for reach.
Absolutely, because it so needs to change. It really needs to change. Having worked in the realms of TV and knowing literally from scratch what you've got to do to actually, I've sat in the drama department, I've sat with the writers, I've sat with the exec producers and directors while they've picked the cast, while they've decided to, I've seen it literally from that basic idea be stripped apart, be regenerated into something that the viewers, they think, well, we'll watch. And literally it has been, because, there've been BAFTAs and Emmys that have come into that department galore. To how they schedule it, to literally planning 5 years in advance, to actually having to strip all that out and plan vigilantly. And then to the absolute second of how that's going to fit in with commercials and everything else. And then the technology, of course, like you were saying, that goes with that. But the view of how the ratings war, which crucifies in a way any creativity, because you're literally just fighting for figures. And it's figures for me that literally pulls any creative and drains the creativity out of most things, because as soon as you start to put the figures in, there's pressure there to perform. for something that isn't necessarily of the right essence. And unless you're following the right essence, and you've got to dig that little bit deeper, then you're up against a real struggle.
I see that. I mean, my stomping ground was theatre, particularly straight theatre and Shakespearean words. It was always the words. But I see that in business as well, in the kind of motivational business, online business. We have so much ability to reach people that it becomes a numbers game. And great people who have great work to share feel like they are failing because they're not reaching the right amount of people. Or it becomes so monetary driven that where's the heart and soul? And I guess, over the last 18 months, I feel like I've just woken up again. I often feel like I wake up and then I fall asleep. I get tied up in human life, and then, okay, and I know you're here to do something else. You've got to share. And just making that decision that my work isn't going to be led from that place. And I feel a lot happier for it. And I'm prepared not to go after the huge numbers and just walk this journey, because anything else makes me feel unhappy. And why would I feel unhappy?
And I think that's the weird part for a lot of people that might be listening to this, because so many people are in survival mode literally around the globe right now because of what the pandemic has sort of brought on. And that fear of literal survival, of health, of, how do I find shelter? How am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to pay for this and that? And yet communities, I feel, are coming together tenfold to support each other. I do a lot of work with the local food bank, and we've been collecting for the last 3 years around our neighbourhood every single month to take to the food bank. And that means that people who are busy, who literally don't have time to think because they're keeping the economy going, are able to just put a food parcel outside, and we'll go and collect it and drop it off. And it's hours, just a couple of hours of our time every month to go and do that, and support. But collectively over time, that compound effect of those little actions of putting leaflets out one week, the next week going to collect the food, in an hour you've more or less done it, is thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds worth of food that have been collected for that to be distributed just in our local area.
I think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of changes that needed to happen. We're not 100% there yet, but with the rise of social media and the rise of the internet over the last 20, 30 years, and social media even less than that, we have this ability to connect with pretty much anyone in the world, just to some extent, and yet we feel more disconnected than ever. There's two things I want to mention there. I hope I remember them. The first is that it reminds me of the first time I came across Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God in the series. I can't remember which book at all, but I listened to this maybe 20 odd years ago. My parents brought it to me, which was quite unusual for them to read anything like that. So I don't know how they found it. But there was something that he was saying is that, what if humans are actually supposed to be able to communicate anyway with anyone on Earth? What if we're all actually connected? What if we used to have telepathic ability and we've closed it down? And that's really interesting for me as I'm going on much more of my spiritual journey and all of those things, and realizing that actually you can enter someone's field, you can view their field, you can. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. And then the other thing that I was going to say, what sprung from that? Oh, I can't remember.
Okay, let's go back, because I'm liking how this is going anyway, because it's stuff I love. So let's go back, because I know you've recently trained in Reiki, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've recently trained in lots of things. So I recently did Reiki 1 and 2. I'm about to become a Reiki master and a Reiki teacher in the next couple of months. I've recently trained in theta healing, which has really helped me open up my trust in psychic ability. I think this is something I always had, but through various trying to conform with convention. I blocked it when I was about 13 or 14, and very consciously blocked that. And the more Reiki I was doing, a friend of mine's father had passed, and we were doing a Reiki share together, and I experienced him, and all sorts of words were landing whenever I did Reiki. I very much felt like my crown chakra opened. And then I then began to remember and recall all the instances that I had felt a real spiritual connection or something. For example, when my grandmother died, I felt upright and said to my husband, she's just passed. How would I know that when I was hours away? And it was exactly the time when I conceived my first daughter nearly 18 years ago. Really was not expecting to be conceiving. I knew that I had, and I knew what her name was the moment I knew, because I knew. And I think I'd always blocked those things or dimmed them down, and so many synchronicities that have happened in my life. I actually think I am kind of a master manifester when I focus on it, and often it's the wrong things. And so, so that's been really powerful. And also, and then I've recently trained as got two other things, EFT, so tapping.
That's my thing. Yeah, love it.
Yeah, and then actually I am partway through a very intensive 400-hour breathwork facilitator training apprenticeship, which the reason I went for this particular training was because the breath that we use is conscious connected breath, which is known for helping you release a lot in the body, right? It's all in the body to then have these spiritual experiences. And that's certainly been true for me over the last couple of months I've been doing that. So yeah, I'm really exploring like how I've loved, since I knew that NLP and neuroscience could make a difference, I've been really curious. But over the last 18 months, I've been led more and more to much deeper meditation practices, breathwork practices, all these modalities, because ultimately I know I'm here. Open other people up to the potential of that work.
Absolutely. And when you start opening people up to that, and you sharing that experience, it really does create the most weird and wonderful experiences between you that there are so many that psychology and counseling are beautiful in their own right, and they do a certain job. The difference with energy work is that we don't have to dredge up the past to actually help regenerate our future self. Not to the extent that you do in talking therapies. I was reminded last night of a really beautiful person that I'd worked with, and it was one of my very first clients, and he was a joiner, and he came with his wife, and he's very open about this, so I know I can talk about this. So he was talking, he'd had a near death experience about being in intensive care, and this white light that was very prominent, and he was terrified of. He was terrified because for him, when he came to see me, it represented death. And as we work through that whole process, to see him transition that white light into a fried egg, and then for that fried egg to transition into two doves or bluebirds, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember now, into two birds that literally left his chest and then flew out, and to have him streaming with complete utter relief and joy is still one of my most favourite parts of working and connecting with people. But it brings you together and connects you together for life. Because when we do this work, yes, we say that there should be that client practitioner barrier to keep us safe. But actually that connection that you make is a connection for life. And it is so beautiful and so profound when you
it is completely profound
to witness any boundaries, so that when someone gets back in touch with you and say, oh, I am just on fire at the moment, my life is just fantastic, you just won't believe what is happening, we must have a catch up. you want to have that catch up because it is such an important celebration for them to do that. Of
It's
course,
such a
that's what you're going
privilege
to do.
such a privilege to witness someone's transformation in that way.
It is absolutely beautiful.
Particularly when you've had experiences yourself and you know the depth of what is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you tell us any strange happenings that you've experienced? I know we've touched on Reiki and you've mentioned that you encountered somebody's father. Is there anything that you can talk about that you can share with us now that people can help to understand this process of spiritual connection with the work that you're doing?
I want to make sure I phrase this in the right way. I had some people in my networks who I would have called friends that I was getting nudges about that they weren't safe for me. They weren't safe for me. And I don't know if I was hearing those words in my head or feeling it in my belly. And I pushed that away because they were nice people and we got on and we had a lot in common. Pushing it away. And almost out of nowhere, I'm going to use the word betrayed by these people. And I knew it was going to happen. But I kept myself in that situation, and it made me kind of go, okay, Anna, the betrayal actually, it's not that actually hurts me. What hurts me is I didn't listen to myself because I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. I often have, whenever I do any kind of healing or inner work or neuroscience work or timeline work, whatever, I always come back to this image of being a persecuted woman in Scotland. So it's a past life, particularly potentially an ancestor. Because I'm of Scottish heritage, that I have been thrown down a part-made well, and I've been thrown out of the village and cast out. And this image comes up for me again and again and again and again. And every time that I revisit that, and I can shift or heal a little bit more or understand a little bit more about what either happened for me in a past life or what my brain is storing on a neuro level about that story. And in some ways, does it matter whether it really was a past life or whether it is stored in my brain? It doesn't matter if it unlocks something for me. And I feel that is actually a lot of the core part of my work. My very first book was called Get Visible. And actually, if you look at witches' persecution and women's persecution, which is what it was for hundreds of years, women who were natural leaders, women who were natural orators, women who had natural healing abilities were very powerful within their communities. And that was stripped of them. So there is actually, when I wrote Get Visible, it was more about how you make this happen, how you get over the imposter syndrome you can't to do it. But actually behind that work, it comes down to that fear of showing all that you are.
Yeah.
And I think for lots of us who are aware consciously, there are still hesitancies for some people around sharing that part. And I guess that's one of the things. Yeah,
it's extremely deep, and we know what that feels like. And when you know what that feels like, and it's not just connected to this life, it's connected to other realms, whatever that might be. And we can't see that, and we can't hear it all the time, and we can't. It's not tangible for us to live our life right now. And right now we need to be safe. That pull to stay in that network is greater right there and then because that feels safe. And that unknown right now, okay, I can hear you, but I don't know what to do with that now. I don't know what to do next enough to leave it. And that's okay. I don't think there's any right or wrong there. That is okay because it's going to happen anyway at some point. And when things happen, that's when we can deal with things.
And that not only can you deal with it, but that's for me the big lesson in what was quite a challenging experience the lesson actually is, well, hold on, Anna, you knew what happens if you come back to yourself, and what happens if actually your first line of trust is actually yourself, not your inner self, your inner knowing, a feeling of connection, no matter that it doesn't make sense to the outside world, rather than the ego and ambition and the outward, how it looks to the outside world. And what happens? Great happen when you trust yourself.
Beautifully put as well, because I think that is exactly how this new world is starting to be created, and there are pockets of the world where this is, not just starting, it's happening, and it's happening in full flow. And it's whatever stage we're all at on our journey, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with us. You're not doing anything wrong. And I think that is so important. Wherever you are right now is absolutely right. And the sooner you do start believing yourself, though, that's where the power comes in to actually being.
I think it's really challenging, though, isn't it? Like, it can be really challenging, because if you're. So I was actually thinking about this morning. Now, I'm going through the early stages of menopause, and one of the symptoms of that is anxious feelings. And I often experience those first thing in the morning, and yet I'm not generally an anxious person. And so often those anxious feelings can make me feel that I don't trust myself. And had I not had an awareness, like, that this is something hormonal going on in my body, right? I have to just accept that that's there. Had I not got the understanding that actually in those situations, I need to use tools like meditation, breath work, journaling. I need to see the nudges that are coming through. I need to listen to my gut even more. Then I think I would still feel in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah.
And I think, we've talked about how amazing it is that we can connect with all the technology with so many people now. But the technology as it stands at the moment and the way we're using it as a society, is causing so much anxiety and stress, and it's layering that stress on even more.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the decision to switch off from that, or to monitor how much you're putting in your awareness, is the most crucial part.
Yeah.
Because when you become aware of things that are feeding your brain, and the influence that they have, then you can make decisions as to what you do and don't do. So I don't look at the news. Anything that actually matters in the world, I'm going to find out about it. I'm sure there's lots of points there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, listeners, if you want to just go back to series 1, you can tune into a couple of the quantum scientists who actually talk about the work that they're doing with science and consciousness, and shifting it forward into this new world, so that we actually have data now as to what is actually happening with our intention setting. And when we set our intention, and especially as a group, and we go into absolute resonance with each other in a really deep field of meditation, what actually can happen from that? And the figures that they're showing on the graphs literally show off the scale collective resonance. And when they've taken that baseline, and you see that baseline of this is the reading of a room, and this is what's happening as people are just coming in and moving around. And then there's that actual stillness where you think there would be no connection because it's just quiet. Actually, that quietness, when people are really tuning into themselves, resonates at such a high frequency that telepathy that Anna was talking about earlier happens all the more. We're able to connect with each other in that magnetic field and actually share visions and thoughts and experiences that are really weird and wonderful. So all of that is to come as well in the podcast about more of that and the science behind that. But the more you actually start to tune into yourself and start to experience, the less you need the outside world to confirm what it is that is actually happening in your life, because your story of your life that you have already lived And I think this is why the menopause is extremely important, Anna, because we've lived, you know what I mean? We've lived a life. And by the time we reach an age where the menopause starts to kick in, perimenopause, menopause, we're wiser. We've got all these stories and experiences that actually go boom, boom, boom. Oh, that makes sense for this. I can use this wise person that I am now with all these sensations. And it all starts to fit into place the more we relax into our own meditative, conscious state. And we start to put different jigsaw pieces together. So we're creating a brand new picture like you've just done this past year. You created a whole new version of you. And that'll probably continue and continue. And that's what these different realities are. It's how many times can we regenerate ourselves?
Absolutely. And I think my dad always says that he sees me as a master of reinvention. And I think that's because I feel myself very strongly to be a creative vision, a creative being. And I enjoy that process of creation. So like right now, I have a business idea that behind it isn't just business. It's again, how we reach and change people. And I'm excited about the fact that it gives me that I can tap into that sense of ego and ambition, but actually with much more flow because I now know how to run businesses and how to get them off the ground. And I think when people are really unhappy, it's often because they've stifled their own creativity in so many ways, not just in what life work or life purpose they're going after, but they're not getting out and, I don't know, doing painting or a doodle or I don't know, just anything creative in their world.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking that back to the Neil Donald Walsh, you know, conversations with God, we go back to the Bible, we go back to any manuscript at all. It's about creativity.
Have you read, I thought it was up on my bookshelf. Yes, it is. Mary Magdalene Revealed by Megan Waterson.
No, but it's on my list.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things in that is I can't remember what it was. She went and studied basically all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of the writings that were about Mary or by Mary that were lost for a very, very long time. And tying it up with bits that never made it, other stories that never made it into the Bible about what the Gospels had actually written about Mary. And Megan supposes, well, what if what they were doing was connecting and it wasn't about, it's really anti-Christian now. It wasn't about him being risen. She didn't see him, but they were in a vision together because they were meditating in a particular state. Yeah. And I tell you, the more of this conscious work that I do myself, and you look again at the teachings that have actually come down from Jesus and whatever else.
That makes sense, doesn't it?
They all make sense. Asking it is given. When you come together and you're there for the same purpose, things will happen. Knock and the door will be opened. Actually, those teachings, when you remove the Christian confines of the religion and you look at what those teachings are, they're very similar there from Jesus and Mary and whatever they were doing with other awakened leaders that we've had in the world. Now, I'm not an expert in all of that stuff, but given the conversation we're having today, I thought if people are curious about that, it's Absolutely. A really good read.
And bringing in the science behind that, you know, you've got Einstein and you've got so many other scientists, and they had downloads. You know, they had downloads to get the information that they needed to get scientifically. Where did they get that information from? They had visions, they had mystical experiences. Yeah. Some of them took psychedelic mushrooms or whatever it might be to actually open themselves up more to the field, open themselves more up to consciousness. Yeah. And the more we do that, the more we see things, hear things, feel things that are not necessarily of the vibration that we're at in this matter.
Yeah. And I think for me, what's the name of there's a documentary on Netflix that's about the LSD. I can't remember what it's called.
Oh gosh, yeah. I can't remember what it's called, but it's one that...
And actually some of the breathwork work came out, some of the holotropic breathwork, which isn't what I'm studying at the moment, but the holotropic breathwork came out of some of those LSD experiments as well. How can we do this now that the drugs are illegal? And that's really interesting. And one of the reasons I've been drawn heavily at the moment, for whatever reason, to the breathwork is how can I access an altered state of consciousness to have this either an intuitive, my own wisdom, or a connection to above, or whatever it is you see. And certainly for me, as I've been going on that journey, it feels accelerated. So too with the theta healing, accessing a different state of white light and a realm of possibility. So rather than it feels as though rather than hearing the scientific version of how this might work, you're actually experiencing that for myself. And what's fascinating about that is that we're beginning to see a return to old healing modalities, right? Ancient wisdom. That was much of it in this country, in Europe, was lost because of persecution of wise people and healers. That is far removed from the medical system that we have right now, which is very much actually pharmaceutical, is about profit. It's not about healing. So that's going to be interesting.
It's very interesting. Yeah. And I think that might be quite a good place to leave that part.
Yeah.
Anna, I'm sure you've got something that you want to leave us with, so please do share.
Explore what's coming for you. Don't think the more you can go in whatever way that is for you, whether that's Reiki, whether that's meditation, whether that's breath work, whether that's having timeline therapy, or whatever the modalities are that work for you, or even if you've not tried any, go and do it. If there are ways that you can go in and receive your own messages, they're coming from you, they're coming through you, maybe from somewhere else, but it's your inner wisdom from somewhere. The more you can do that and trust that and act on it, the better your life will become. And if there are things that are niggling away that you're not actioning, or because it would rock the boat, it would rock the status quo, they're probably the things you most need to address before a disaster happens, so that you are the one driving that ship. And I think what's been interesting for me is that sometimes the hardest, most awful things in your life often are for you, not against you. You often need to ride that wave, and then you will realize why it's happened. So I think the more we can lean into self-trust, the easier life becomes.
What beautiful advice. What absolute beautiful advice. Anna, thank you so much for today. It's been a real gift of a conversation. I've loved every single second. And I will put Anna's details in below, people, so that you can find her and contact her and get in touch with anything that might arise from today. Anna, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.